The Grand Royal Opera House gleamed under the soft glow of 1,000 candles on that fateful night in April 1885. Lady Seraphina Vance sat in her family's box, her emerald silk gown catching the light as she shifted uncomfortably beneath the weight of society's expectations. "Sit straight, Seraphina," Lady Millicent Vance whispered sharply. "The Viscount of Ashworth is watching from across the gallery." Seraphina resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "The Viscount is watching everyone, Aunt. His gaze wanders more than his investments." "Heavens," her aunt hissed. "Such impertinence will not secure your future." The orchestra began tuning their instruments as the elite of London society settled into their seats. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. Seraphina followed the collective gaze to the grand box opposite theirs, where a striking figure had appeared. Even from across the theater, his presence commanded attention. "The Duke Alaric Blackwood," her cousin Eliza whispered, leaning forward with undisguised fascination. "They say he's been abroad for years, something about a scandal involving his late wife." Seraphina studied him with detached curiosity. Tall and imposing, the Duke stood, rather than sat, surveying the crowd, as one might inspect a property for purchase. His evening attire was impeccable, his posture rigid, though distance obscured his features. Something about his bearing suggested a man accustomed to power and its exercise without question. "He's looking for a new Duchess," Lady Millicent informed them with barely contained excitement. "Every eligible family in London has received his calling card." "How fortunate we've been overlooked," Seraphina murmured, just loud enough for her aunt to hear. The performance began, Verdi's notes soaring through the opulent space, but Seraphina found her attention repeatedly drawn to the Duke's box. He seemed as disinterested in the opera as she was, his gaze wandering across the audience. Millicent, ever vigilant, attempted to steer her attention back to a promising, if portly, bachelor in the stalls, but Seraphina's focus remained elsewhere. During the interval, the corridors filled with the aristocracy's practiced chatter. Seraphina escaped her aunt's vigilance and slipped toward a less crowded passage that led to a small balcony overlooking the Thames. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. "You seem to find London society as tedious as I do, Lady Vance." The deep voice startled her. Turning, she found herself face to face with the Duke Alaric Blackwood. Up close he was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features carved from what seemed like marble. His eyes, a piercing steel blue, studied her with unsettling intensity. "Your Grace," she said, offering a curtsy that was just shallow enough to be noticed. "I wasn't aware we were acquainted." A ghost of amusement flickered across his face. "We aren't, but your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, Your Grace." The words escaped before prudence could intervene. Instead of offense, something like interest sparked in his eyes. "And what reputation is that?" "That you're particular about your company," she replied carefully. "Yet here you are, seeking conversation with a woman known for her unconventional opinions." "Perhaps I find conventional opinions tiresome." He moved closer, his scent of sandalwood and leather invading her space. "What do you make of the performance, Lady Vance?" "I find the audience more dramatic than the stage, Your Grace." The corner of his mouth twitched. "A keen observation. And which players have caught your attention tonight?" "Those who believe a title grants them wisdom rather than merely land and privilege." The words hung between them, bold and dangerous. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You speak quite freely for someone in your position." "And what position is that, precisely?" "An unmarried lady of good family, but diminishing prospects." His assessment was cold, calculated. Seraphina felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I believe the interval is ending, Your Grace. I should return to my aunt before she sends a search party." As she moved to pass him, he stepped into her path, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You misunderstand me, Lady Vance. I don't disapprove of your candor. On the contrary, I find it refreshing." His voice had dropped lower, almost intimate. "Then you're in the minority, Your Grace." I've never aspired to be among the majority. The warning bell sounded, announcing the end of the interval. Seraphina felt trapped between the wall and the Duke, though he had not moved to touch her. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than her pulse. "Of course." He stepped aside, but as she passed, he added, "Lady Vance, a word of caution. There are those in society who would see your spirit broken rather than celebrated. Be careful whom you challenge." She paused, turning back to face him. "Including you, Your Grace?" For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his severe features into something unexpectedly handsome. "Especially me." Seraphina returned to her box with her heart racing. Throughout the remainder of the performance, she could feel his gaze from across the theater. When she finally dared to look directly at his box, their eyes met across the expanse of crimson velvet and crystal chandeliers. The intensity of his stare sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't fear that made her pulse quicken, but something far more dangerous. Later, as their carriage rolled through London's foggy streets, her aunt prattled on about potential suitors, but Seraphina's thoughts remained with the enigmatic Duke and his warning. Or was it a challenge? "You're unusually quiet," Eliza observed as they approached their Mayfair home. "I'm merely tired," Seraphina replied, though sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. "Did something happen during the interval?" her cousin pressed. Seraphina thought of the Duke's penetrating gaze, his unexpected words. "Nothing of consequence," she lied, unaware that their brief encounter had set in motion events that would irrevocably change her life. In his own carriage across London, the Duke Alaric Blackwood contemplated the emerald-clad Lady Vance. Her defiance had awakened something he'd thought long buried. Curiosity, yes, but also desire. Not merely for her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, but for her mind, sharp and unafraid. "Lady Ashworth, residence tomorrow, sir," his valet, Mr. Silas Croft, inquired as they approached his Belgravia mansion. "No," the Duke replied, his decision made. "We'll call on the Vance household instead." "Very good, sir." As London slept beneath a blanket of fog, two souls remained awake, one contemplating a challenge issued, the other a challenge accepted. Neither could have predicted how their lives would soon entangle, for better or worse. The Vance household erupted into chaos the following afternoon, when the Duke Alaric Blackwood's card was delivered. Lady Millicent nearly swooned, while Eliza peppered their butler, Simmons, with questions about the Duke's demeanor. "Did he say why he's calling?" Seraphina asked, the only one maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "No, my lady," Simmons replied. "Only that he would be honored to speak with Lady Seraphina Vance, specifically you, my lady." Lady Millicent clutched her handkerchief. "Goodness gracious, the Duke here. The drawing-room must be prepared at once. Eliza, fetch your best gown. You too, Seraphina. We must make a favorable impression." "I am already dressed appropriately for receiving visitors, Aunt," Seraphina replied calmly, though internally she was anything but calm. She wore a high-necked day dress in deep blue that complemented her dark chestnut hair, which was neatly arranged in an elegant chignon. "But this is the Duke Alaric Blackwood, not some country squire," her aunt protested. "And I am Lady Seraphina Vance, not a debutante at her first ball," Seraphina countered firmly. Before her aunt could respond, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced the Duke's arrival. The household staff rushed to their positions, while Lady Millicent patted her hair frantically, and Eliza pinched her cheeks for color. Seraphina took a deep breath and positioned herself by the window, determined to appear unaffected by his visit, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The Duke was announced moments later, his tall figure filling the doorway. In daylight, he was even more striking, his dark hair showing hints of auburn in the afternoon sun, his features sharp but harmonious. He bowed to Lady Millicent, greeted Eliza with practiced charm, and then turned to Seraphina. "Lady Vance," he said, his voice carrying a warmth absent in his other greetings. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she replied with a proper curtsy this time, "we're honored by your visit." Lady Millicent launched into a stream of pleasantries, offering tea and inquiring after the Duke's health. He responded with impeccable politeness, but his eyes repeatedly returned to Seraphina. "I wonder, Lady Millicent," he said when she paused for breath, "if I might speak with Lady Seraphina about a matter of mutual interest." "Of course, Your Grace." Lady Millicent practically glowed with anticipation. "Eliza and I were just about to inspect the conservatory, weren't we, dear?" Eliza, clearly disappointed to be dismissed, nevertheless followed her mother from the room, leaving Seraphina alone with the Duke, save for Mrs. Gable, Seraphina's lady's companion, who sat discreetly in the corner, her presence the only thing preserving propriety. The moment the door closed, the Duke's demeanor subtly shifted. The practiced charm gave way to something more genuine, though no less intense. "You seem surprised by my call, Lady Vance?" "I confess I am," she admitted. "Our conversation last night hardly seemed to warrant a formal visit." He moved to the window where she stood, careful to maintain a proper distance. "On the contrary, I found it the most stimulating conversation I've had since returning to England." "You must have spoken to very few people then, Your Grace." A smile tugged at his lips. "Quality over quantity, Lady Vance." She studied him, trying to discern his purpose. "What is this matter of mutual interest you mentioned to my aunt?" "Literature." He gestured to the book half hidden on the side table. "Wordsworth? An interesting choice." Seraphina glanced at the volume of poetry she'd been reading earlier. "You're familiar with his works?" "The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers," he quoted softly. "Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon," she finished, surprised. His eyes held approval. "You see, Lady Vance, mutual interests indeed. I wouldn't have thought a duke would find time for poetry between managing estates and attending social obligations. There's much about me you wouldn't expect." He moved closer, dropping his voice. "Just as I suspect there's much about you that defies expectation." From her corner, Mrs. Gable coughed discreetly, reminding them of her presence. The Duke acknowledged her with a nod, before returning his attention to Seraphina. "I have come to invite you and your family to a small gathering at my estate this weekend," he said, his voice returning to its public timbre. "Westcliff Abbey is only an hour's journey from London. The spring gardens are quite remarkable." Seraphina raised an eyebrow. "A gathering? You've only just returned to society, Your Grace." "All the more reason to reacquaint myself with England's finest families," he replied smoothly, "including the Vances." She sensed there was more to this invitation than social niceties. "And if I decline?" His eyes gleamed with challenge. "Then I would be disappointed. But I would respect your decision. However," he added, lowering his voice again, "I believe you would find the library at Westcliff Abbey particularly to your taste. My grandfather was an avid collector of first editions, including several rare volumes of female authors society preferred to ignore. It was a calculated move, appealing to her intellectual curiosity, and they both knew it. A tempting offer," she admitted. "Then you'll come." Seraphina considered her options. Refusing would be the prudent choice. Something about the Duke unsettled her in ways both frightening and exhilarating. Yet the promise of rare books, combined with her own curiosity about this enigmatic man, proved too compelling. "I shall have to consult with my aunt," she said finally. "Of course." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope, the formal invitation for Lady Millicent's peace of mind. As she took it, their fingers brushed, the briefest of contacts, yet it sent a jolt through her that she struggled to hide. From his sudden stillness, she suspected he had felt it too. "Until the weekend, Lady Vance." He bowed, his eyes never leaving hers. After he departed, Lady Millicent and Eliza rushed back into the room, bombarding her with questions. Seraphina handed over the invitation, her mind elsewhere. Why had the Duke singled her out? Was it merely her defiance that intrigued him, or something more? That night, as her lady's maid prepared her for bed, Mrs. Gable spoke up from where she was turning down the covers. "Be careful, my lady," she said softly. "Men like the Duke, they're not accustomed to hearing no." Seraphina met her companion's concerned gaze in the mirror. "Do you think his interest is improper, Mrs. Gable?" The older woman chose her words carefully. "I think his interest is genuine, which may be more dangerous still. His eyes followed you like a hawk watches a dove." "I'm hardly a dove," Seraphina replied with a small smile. "No, my lady, you're not," Mrs. Gable agreed. "Perhaps that's what draws him. But remember, hawks are predators by nature, no matter how magnificent they appear in flight." Later, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the curtains, Seraphina recalled the Duke's intense gaze across the opera house, the way his voice had lowered when they spoke alone, the electricity when their fingers touched. Danger, yes, but also something thrilling that called to the part of her that had always felt constrained by society's narrow expectations. Across London in his study at Blackwood House, the Duke Alaric Blackwood examined a leather-bound journal containing carefully researched information about Lady Seraphina Vance, her education in Switzerland, her late father's progressive politics before his death, her small but significant inheritance held in trust until her marriage or 25th birthday, her reputation for intelligent conversation, and disregard for certain social conventions. "She's not like the others," his secretary, Mr. Silas Croft, observed from where he stood by the fireplace. "No," the Duke agreed, closing the journal. "She's not." "Is that wise, Alaric?" Silas ventured. "After what happened with Lady Rosamond?" The Duke's expression hardened. "Lady Vance is nothing like Rosamond. Still, society will talk, especially given her outspoken nature." "Let them talk," the Duke replied, pouring himself a brandy. "I find I care less for society's opinion with each passing year." Silas studied his longtime friend and employer. "What is it you want from her?" The Duke stared into the amber liquid as if it held the answer. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted, "but I intend to find out." The weekend approached with the inevitability of fate. Lady Millicent had accepted the invitation with almost indecent haste, and now the Vance women found themselves in a carriage bound for Westcliff Abbey, the Duke's country estate. As they passed through the iron gates and down a long drive lined with ancient oaks, Seraphina caught her first glimpse of the mansion, a grand Palladian structure of golden stone, its windows glinting in the spring sunshine. It was beautiful, yet somehow forbidding. "Remember your manners, Seraphina," Lady Millicent instructed for the 10th time. "This could be the opportunity of a lifetime, Seraphina." Seraphina merely nodded, her attention caught by a solitary figure standing at the top of the entrance steps. Even at this distance, she recognized the Duke's commanding presence. As their carriage pulled to a stop, he descended to greet them personally, an honor that had Lady Millicent practically glowing with pride. He assisted each lady from the carriage, his hand lingering slightly longer when it clasped Seraphina's. "Welcome to Westcliff Abbey, Lady Vance," he said, his eyes conveying a message beyond his formal words. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite, Your Grace," she replied. "Your estate is impressive." "You've seen nothing yet," he promised, offering his arm to escort her up the steps. "Allow me to show you the gardens first. I believe they'll be to your liking." Lady Millicent and Eliza followed, escorted by the Duke's secretary, Mr. Croft. As they rounded the side of the house, Seraphina gasped despite herself. The gardens were magnificent, a harmonious blend of formal Italian design and the more natural English style, with fountains and statuary artfully placed among flower beds bursting with spring blooms. "This is beautiful," she admitted freely. "My grandmother's passion," the Duke explained, his voice softening with rare sentiment. "She believed gardens should balance structure with wildness, much like life itself." They strolled along a gravel path, gradually outdistancing the others. When they reached a small pavilion overlooking a lake, the Duke slowed. "I hoped we might speak privately," he said, glancing back to ensure they weren't overheard. "There's something I wish to discuss with you, Lady Vance." Seraphina felt a flutter of apprehension mixed with curiosity. "Is it proper for us to be alone, Your Grace?" "We're hardly alone," he replied, nodding toward the house, where several guests could be seen on the terrace. "Merely out of earshot." She raised an eyebrow. "A state which some might argue is the more dangerous." "Do you feel in danger from me?" he asked, studying her face intently. "Should I?" His expression grew serious. "No. Whatever else I may be, I am a gentleman. But I find the conventions that govern our society often prevent honest conversation." "And you wish for honest conversation with me? Why?" He gestured for her to sit on a stone bench, maintaining a proper distance as he joined her. "Because you intrigue me, Lady Vance. You speak your mind in a society that demands women be decorative and agreeable. You've educated yourself beyond what most men deem appropriate. You challenge me, and you enjoy being challenged." "I enjoy authenticity," he corrected, "something rarely found in our circles." Seraphina studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful man with the cold, imposing figure of the Duke's public persona. "What is it you wish to discuss that requires such privacy?" "I find myself in a position where I must remarry. My family name requires an heir, and society expects a duke to have a duchess." Seraphina's heart inexplicably sank. "I see. You're seeking advice on potential candidates." "I'm afraid I'm poorly qualified to—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "I'm not asking for matchmaking services. I'm informing you that I've been evaluating potential wives, and after our meeting at the opera, I find myself drawn to you." She stared at him, speechless, for perhaps the first time in her adult life. "I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified, misreading her silence. "Not yet. I believe such decisions should be based on more than a brief acquaintance. But I am proposing an understanding." "An understanding?" she repeated slowly. "I would like your permission to court you, Lady Vance, properly, with your aunt's blessing, to determine if we might suit." Seraphina found her voice at last. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but this is unexpected. We hardly know each other." "Hence the courtship," he replied with a hint of amusement. "I'm not asking for your hand today. I'm asking for the chance to discover if you might one day be willing to give it." She stood, needing space to think. "Why me?" "There are dozens of eligible young ladies in London, with larger dowries, better connections, and more compliant natures." He rose as well, his height forcing her to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. "Perhaps I've had my fill of compliance. Perhaps I want a wife who will speak truth to me, even when it's uncomfortable. Perhaps," his voice dropped lower, "perhaps I simply find you impossible to forget after our encounter at the opera." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. This was madness. She barely knew him, and his reputation was shadowed by rumors she didn't fully understand. Yet something about him called to her in ways no other man ever had. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Of course," he inclined his head. "But I should warn you, I'm not a patient man by nature, Lady Vance. When I decide I want something, I pursue it with determination. And is that what I am to you? Something to be pursued and acquired, like a prized horse or a rare book." Instead of taking offense, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his austere features. "No, Lady Vance, you are neither object nor possession. You are a woman of uncommon intelligence and spirit, and I find myself wanting to know if those qualities might complement my own nature." He offered his arm once more. "Shall we rejoin the others before your aunt sends out a search party?" As they walked back toward the house, Seraphina was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth of his arm beneath her gloved hand, the way other guests watched their progress with undisguised interest. "You realize you've just ensured I'll be the subject of gossip throughout the weekend," she murmured. "Would you prefer I pretend indifference?" he asked. "I would prefer understanding your true intentions," she replied honestly. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "My intentions are precisely as I've stated them. I wish to court you with the eventual aim of marriage, should we find ourselves compatible. I'm not a man who plays games, Lady Vance. All of society is a game, Your Grace. You know that as well as I. Then, perhaps it's time to change the rules." His gaze held hers, unwavering and sincere. "I'll await your answer, but not indefinitely." With that, he escorted her back to the terrace, where Lady Millicent was already speculating with the other guests about the apparent interest the Duke was showing in her niece. The die had been cast. Whatever Seraphina decided, she knew her life had irrevocably changed the moment the Duke Alaric Blackwood had claimed her with his gaze across the opera house. For better or worse, remained to be seen. The weekend at Westcliff Abbey unfolded like a carefully orchestrated play. The Duke was attentive to all his guests, but found ways to single Seraphina out, requesting her opinion during dinner conversations, arranging for her to partner him during an impromptu musical evening, ensuring she was seated near him at every opportunity. By Sunday morning, the gossip among the guests had reached fever pitch. Lady Millicent was beside herself with anticipation, while Eliza vacillated between envy and excitement at the prospect of becoming cousin to a duchess. Seraphina, however, found herself increasingly overwhelmed by the relentless scrutiny. Seraphina found sanctuary in the promised library, a magnificent two-story room lined with thousands of volumes. She had slipped away after breakfast, seeking solitude to clear her thoughts. The Duke had given her until their departure that afternoon to consider his proposal of courtship. She ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books, inhaling the comforting scent of paper and binding glue. Here, at least, she could think clearly, away from the Duke's magnetic presence and her aunt's transparent scheming. She needed clarity amidst the swirling emotions and calculated societal moves. "I thought I might find you here." She turned to find Mr. Silas Croft, the Duke's secretary, standing by the library entrance. Unlike his employer, Silas Croft had a gentle manner, scholarly and reserved, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Mr. Croft," she acknowledged with a nod. "I was just admiring His Grace's collection." "His grandfather's collection," he corrected, approaching a nearby shelf. "The current Duke has added to it, of course, but the foundation was laid by the old Duke, a remarkable man with progressive ideas for his time." "Like his grandson?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Silas studied her thoughtfully. "His Grace is complex, but yes, in many ways he takes after his grandfather rather than his father. You speak as though you knew them both." "I grew up at Westcliff Abbey," he explained. "My father was the previous Duke's secretary before me. I've known Alaric, His Grace, since we were boys." Seraphina seized the opportunity to gain insight. "Then you must know him well." A small smile crossed Silas's face. "Better than most, though I wouldn't presume to say I know all his thoughts." She hesitated, then decided on directness. "The rumors about his first marriage." Silas's expression grew guarded. "Sots are largely exaggerated, as rumors tend to be. But something did happen, something that drove him from England." He sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with a handkerchief, a delaying tactic, she suspected. "It's not my place to discuss His Grace's personal affairs. I will say only that he suffered a great deal, and that he deserved better than the treatment he received from society." Seraphina's gaze sharpened. "Was he cruel to her?" Seraphina asked, voicing her greatest fear. Silas's head snapped up, his expression shocked. "Good heavens, no! Alaric would never—" He caught himself, reverting to formality. "His Grace is many things, Lady Vance, but cruel is not among them. He is demanding, yes, exacting in his expectations, but never cruel." Before she could press further, the library door opened again, revealing the subject of their conversation. The Duke paused, taking in the scene before him, his steel-blue eyes sweeping over them both. "I see you found the library's greatest treasure, Silas," he said, his tone light but his eyes watchful. "Lady Vance was admiring your collection, Your Grace," Silas replied smoothly. "I was just explaining its history." "And now you're needed elsewhere, I believe," the Duke said pointedly. Silas bowed to them both. "So I am. Of course, Your Grace, Lady Vance." As the door closed behind him, the Duke approached Seraphina, his presence filling the space Silas had vacated. "Finding everything to your satisfaction?" "The library is magnificent," she admitted. "I could spend weeks here and not read half of what interests me." "Then you must return. he said simply. "Regardless of your answer to my proposal." She met his gaze directly. "I was asking Mr. Croft about your first marriage." If she expected anger, she was disappointed. Instead, his expression showed something like respect for her boldness. "And did he satisfy your curiosity?" "No." "He's quite loyal to you, as he should be." The Duke moved to a nearby window, looking out over the gardens. "What is it you wish to know, Lady Vance?" "Ask me directly." She joined him at the window, keeping a proper distance. "Why did you leave England after Rosamond's death? And why return now, seeking another marriage?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but she sensed the effort it cost him. "Rosamond, the late Duchess, was not what she appeared to be when we married. I was young, barely 25, and she was beautiful, accomplished, and seemingly gentle-natured. Within months of our marriage, I discovered she had destructive tendencies." "In what way?" His jaw tightened. "She gambled. Not socially, as many ladies do, but compulsively. She accumulated debts I knew nothing about, until creditors began appearing at our door. When I attempted to address the issue, she became unpredictable, volatile. Charlotte, the late Duchess, was not what she appeared to be when we married." Alaric's voice was controlled, but Seraphina sensed the immense effort it cost him. He stood by the library window, his back to her, looking out at the serene gardens, a stark contrast to the turmoil he was revealing. "I was young, barely 25, and she was beautiful, accomplished, and seemingly gentle-natured. Within months of our marriage, I discovered she had destructive tendencies. She gambled, not socially, as many ladies do, but compulsively. She accumulated debts I knew nothing about, until creditors began appearing at our door. When I attempted to address the issue, she became unpredictable, volatile." Seraphina's hand went to her throat, a silent gasp. "Was she unwell?" she asked softly. Alaric finally turned, his expression haunted. In her mind, yes, though it wasn't recognized as such then. Her family had hidden her episodes of melancholy and rage, presenting her as the perfect aristocratic daughter. They knew what they were doing. They needed her married to wealth to save themselves from her father's poor investments. He paused, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "She took her own life here at Westcliff Abbey, in the West Wing. The servants found her in her bath. I was in London at the time, addressing another of her gambling debts." The words hung in the air, heavy with tragedy. How terrible indeed, but what followed was worse. Her family, to hide the truth of her suicide, and to deflect from their deception before our marriage, implied I had driven her to despair with cruelty. They whispered that I had married her for her family name and then neglected her, that I had paramours in London while she wasted away in the country, none of which was true. I was faithful to her until the end. Despite everything, I tried to help her, brought doctors from as far as Vienna. Nothing worked. He ran a hand through his dark hair in a rare gesture of vulnerability. After her death, I couldn't bear the whispers, the sidelong glances. I left for my estates in America, then traveled. For 5 years I've stayed away from England. "And now you've returned to find another wife," Seraphina said, trying to keep judgment from her voice. "Why?" Alaric met her gaze directly. "Because I'm the last of my line," he replied simply. "Because despite everything, I believe in family, in legacy, and building something that outlasts oneself." His steel blue eyes held hers. "And because I believe it's possible to find a true partnership in marriage, despite my first experience." "With me?" she asked, still incredulous that he had singled her out. "You intrigue me, Lady Vance. You have spirit, intelligence, and honesty, qualities I've come to value above beauty or dowry or connections." When our eyes met across the opera house, I felt... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I felt recognized, seen for who I am rather than the title I bear. The vulnerability in his admission touched her. His austere features softened almost imperceptibly as he spoke, revealing the depth of a man who had long walked alone. Still, caution held her back. "You speak of partnership, Your Grace. But marriage for women is rarely equal. A husband owns his wife's property, controls her movements, dictates her choices. Is that how you see marriage? It's how the law sees marriage, she corrected, her voice firm. No matter a husband's intentions, the power lies entirely with him. He considered this, his gaze thoughtful. And if I were to offer guarantees, legal protections for your independence and property? You would do that? Seraphina asked, surprised. I would consider it, he said carefully, for the right woman. Seraphina studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful man with the cold, imposing figure of the Duke's public persona. I need time to consider, she said finally. Of course. He moved toward the door. We depart in 2 hours. I'll await your answer then. When the time came to depart, the Duke handed her into the carriage last, using the moment to murmur, Your answer, Lady Vance. She met his gaze steadily. Yes, Your Grace, you may court me, but I make no promises beyond that. Something like triumph flashed in his eyes. I ask for no promises yet, only opportunity. As the carriage pulled away from the grand Palladian estate, Seraphina watched Alaric standing on the steps of Westcliff Abbey, a commanding figure. She had just altered the course of her life with a single word. The following weeks transformed Lady Seraphina Vance from a moderately notable society figure into the subject of London's most avid speculation. The Duke of Blackwood's courtship was conducted with the same precision and attention to detail that characterized everything he did. Flowers arrived daily at the Vance home. Invitations to exclusive events were extended. Carefully selected books appeared, each containing a pressed flower and a note in the Duke's strong hand, commenting on passages he thought might interest her. Lady Millicent was beside herself with pride, while Eliza vacillated between jealousy and excitement at the prospect of becoming cousin to a Duchess. Mrs. Gable watched it all with quiet concern, saying little, but observing much. He's very determined, my lady, Mrs. Gable remarked one evening as she brushed Seraphina's long chestnut hair before bed. Yes, Seraphina agreed, watching her reflection in the mirror. He approaches courtship as he might a military campaign. And does that trouble you, my lady? Mrs. Gable asked carefully. Seraphina considered the question. Not as much as perhaps it should. There's something reassuring about his certainty. And your own feelings? Mrs. Gable pressed softly. I find him fascinating, Seraphina admitted. Complex, not always easy to understand, but never dull. When we're together, I feel, she trailed off, unsure how to articulate the mixture of challenge, excitement, and safety she felt in the Duke's presence. Alive, Mrs. Gable suggested softly. Seraphina's eyes met her companion's in the mirror. Yes, exactly that. The courtship progressed through London's spring season, their encounters always chaperoned, but somehow intimate nonetheless. The Duke had a talent for creating private moments in public spaces, a quiet conversation in a crowded ballroom, a shared observation during a musical performance, a brief touch of hands while examining a painting at an exhibition. Their bond strengthened through these subtle interactions, a language unspoken yet deeply understood. Seraphina found herself searching for his gaze across rooms, for the slight tilt of his head that indicated he was listening, truly listening, to her words. It was a dance of propriety and profound connection, a delicate balance that thrilled her. At a garden party in early June, they found themselves momentarily separated from the other guests, hidden from view by a flowering arbor. The Duke's hand brushed against hers, a seemingly accidental touch that sent warmth spiraling through her. You've been avoiding private conversation with me, he observed, his voice low. I've been observing propriety, she corrected, her pulse quickening. As have you. Until this moment. His lips quirked. 6 weeks of proper courtship has nearly exhausted my patience, Lady Vance. The great Duke of Blackwood. Impatient? I'm shocked. She teased, finding boldness in the secluded setting. Only where you're concerned. His expression grew serious, his steel blue eyes piercing hers. You've had time to observe me now, to form opinions beyond rumors and first impressions. I would hear them. Seraphina considered her words carefully. I believe you are a man of principle, if not always conventional morality. You value honesty and dislike pretense. You're demanding of others, but most demanding of yourself. She paused, watching his face for a reaction. And I believe you're still haunted by your first marriage, despite your determination to move forward. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps at her perception, quickly veiled. Quite the character study, he murmured. You asked for my observations. She reminded him with a small, defiant smile. So I did. He moved closer, still not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the heat of his body. And what of your feelings? Beyond these clinical assessments, her heart quickened, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Those are more difficult to articulate. Try, he urged softly. She took a steadying breath. I find myself thinking of you when you're not present, anticipating our next meeting, replaying our conversations. The admission cost her something in pride, but honesty compelled her forward. I'm drawn to you in ways I don't fully understand. His expression softened, vulnerability showing through his usual reserve. I have thought of little else but you since that night at the opera. Your intelligence, your spirit, your beauty. They've captivated me entirely. Before she could respond, voices approached their secluded spot. The Duke stepped back smoothly, maintaining appearances, but his eyes held a promise of future conversation. Later that evening, as the Vance carriage returned them to Mayfair, Lady Millicent could contain herself no longer. The Duke barely left your side all afternoon, she observed, failing to hide her excitement. Surely a proposal is imminent. Aunt, please, Seraphina protested. We've known each other barely 6 weeks. 6 weeks is an eternity for a man like the Duke, Eliza chimed in. Everyone says he never does anything by halves. When he makes a decision, he acts. Seraphina gazed out the carriage window at the passing London streets, illuminated by the soft glow of gas lamps. Her cousin's words echoed her own thoughts. The Duke was not a man to court indefinitely without purpose. Soon she would face a choice that would determine the course of her future. That night she dreamed of steel blue eyes and a voice that caressed her name like a physical touch. She woke breathless, her body warm with unfamiliar yearning. The image of Alaric, both formidable and vulnerable, lingered, stirring a deep, unsettling anticipation. 2 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Vance home. Seraphina was reading in the morning room when Simmons announced, "Mr. Silas Croft to see you, my lady." Surprised, Seraphina set aside her book. "Show him in, please." Silas entered, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable, his scholarly demeanor tinged with anxiety. "Lady Vance, forgive the intrusion." "Not at all, Mr. Croft. Please, sit." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Is the Duke well in health?" "Yes," Silas replied carefully. "In spirits," he hesitated. "That's actually why I'm here. Unofficially and without His Grace's knowledge." Seraphina straightened, concern growing. "What's happened?" Silas leaned forward, lowering his voice, though they were alone. Yesterday was the anniversary of the late Duchess Rosamond's death. Richard, His Grace, always struggles with this date. He tends to retreat into himself, becomes somewhat harsh in his dealings with others. "I see," Seraphina said slowly. "And you're telling me this because I've observed his regard for you as genuine, Lady Vance. More than that, I believe you've awakened something in him that I feared was permanently lost after Rosamond's death." Silas's expression was earnest, his eyes pleading behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. "He may withdraw from you in the coming days. I didn't want you to misinterpret his behavior. I've known Richard since we were boys. I've seen him at his best and his worst. What happened with Rosamond nearly destroyed him. Not just her death, but the scandal, the whispers, the isolation he faced afterward. His voice grew passionate. He built walls around himself that no one has breached until you. If you care for him at all, don't let him retreat behind them again." "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Croft, but please—" Before she could finish, Simmons appeared at the doorway. "A message from the Duke of Blackwood, my lady." Seraphina accepted the sealed note, breaking the wax emblem with steady fingers. Inside, a brief message. "My carriage will call for you at 3 o'clock if convenient. I have matters of importance to discuss. R. B." "No response is needed, Simmons," she said, folding the note closed. When the butler had departed, she turned back to Silas. "It seems the Duke wishes to see me this afternoon." Relief crossed his features. "Good. That's unexpected, but good." He rose to leave. "I should go before he learns I've been here. He wouldn't appreciate my interference." "Mr. Croft," she called as he reached the door. "Thank you for your candor." He bowed slightly. "I hope I haven't overstepped, my lady, but I believe some rules are worth breaking for the right cause." At precisely 3 o'clock, the Duke's carriage arrived. Lady Millicent insisted on sending Mrs. Gable as chaperone, though she nearly vibrated with excitement at this unexpected development. Remember, a lady always appears composed no matter the circumstances, she instructed as Seraphina donned her bonnet. "If he proposes, accept with dignity, not excessive emotion." "Aunt, please," Seraphina protested. "We're merely going for a drive." "A private drive, requested with urgency," her aunt countered meaningfully. "Be prepared, my dear." The Duke himself handed her into the carriage, his manner formal and his expression guarded. After acknowledging Mrs. Gable with a nod, he took the seat opposite them, instructing his driver, "Hyde Park, Edward." They rode in silence for several minutes. The Duke's gaze fixed on the passing streets. Seraphina studied him surreptitiously, noting the tightness around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw. There was a tension in his posture that hadn't been present in their recent meetings. "I trust you're well, Lady Vance," he finally said, his tone politely distant. "Quite well, Your Grace," she replied, watching him carefully. "And yourself?" "Well enough." His gaze finally met hers, but it was guarded. "I appreciate your agreeing to this drive on short notice." "Of course." Another silence fell, this one stretching uncomfortably. When they reached the relative privacy of Hyde Park, the Duke instructed the driver to proceed slowly along the less trafficked paths. Though other carriages and riders were visible in the distance, they had a measure of privacy, while still maintaining propriety with Mrs. Gable's presence. "I owe you an explanation," the Duke said abruptly, "for my absence these past 2 days." "No explanation is necessary, Your Grace," Seraphina replied gently, "though I admit I wondered if something had happened to change your regard." Something flickered in his eyes, surprised perhaps at her directness. "No, my regard remains unchanged." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "If anything, it deepens with each meeting." Her heart quickened at the admission. "Then why the formality today? The distance?" He glanced briefly at Mrs. Gable, who had diplomatically turned her attention to the scenery outside the carriage window, before answering in a lower voice. "Yesterday was difficult for me. The anniversary of Rosamond's death always is." His hands tightened on his walking stick, his knuckles white. "I find myself revisiting decisions, questioning whether I could have prevented what happened." "You feel responsible," she observed softly. "I was her husband," he replied simply. "Her protection was my duty, even from herself." He looked away, his jaw tightening again. "I failed in that duty." Seraphina considered her next words carefully. "Mr. Croft believes otherwise." The Duke's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Silas spoke to you about this?" "He was concerned for you," she said, not wishing to cause trouble for the secretary. "He cares deeply for your well-being." "He oversteps," the Duke muttered, though without real anger, more a weary resignation. "Perhaps," Seraphina acknowledged, "but I appreciate understanding the context for your withdrawal." The Duke studied her for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to respect in his gaze. "Most women would have been offended by my sudden absence after weeks of devoted attention. They would demand apologies, reassurances." "I'm not most women," she reminded him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "No, you are not." He returned the ghost of a smile, transforming his severe features for a brief moment. His expression grew serious again. "That's precisely why I've asked to see you today, Lady Vance. I find myself at a crossroads. Regarding my intentions toward you..." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. "I began this courtship with a clear purpose, to determine if we might suit as husband and wife. After these weeks in your company, I find my initial interest has grown into something far deeper than I anticipated." Seraphina's breath caught. "Your Grace, Richard," he interrupted, his voice dropping lower, almost a plea. "When we are as private as circumstances allow, I would hear my name from your lips." The intimacy of the request sent a shiver through her. "Richard," she said softly, testing the shape of it. "What are you saying?" His gaze held hers intently. "I am saying that yesterday, in the midst of remembering my greatest failure, I found myself thinking not of the past, but of you, of a future that seemed impossible until I met you." He reached across the space between them, his gloved hand hovering near hers. "I'm saying that I wish to ask you a question of great significance, but I find myself, for perhaps the first time in my adult life, uncertain of my reception." Mrs. Gable coughed discreetly, reminding them of her presence without looking their way. The Duke straightened, withdrawing his hand. "Perhaps this conversation requires a more appropriate setting." He raised his voice slightly. "I would like to call on you tomorrow, Lady Vance, to speak with your aunt about a matter of importance. Would 11 o'clock be convenient?" Seraphina understood his meaning immediately. "Yes, Your Grace. I believe that would be most convenient." The remainder of their drive passed with safer topics. A discussion of a new exhibition at the Royal Academy, commentary on the fashions they observed in the park, mild gossip about mutual acquaintances. Yet underneath the conventional conversation ran a current of anticipation that made Seraphina's heart race whenever their eyes met. The unspoken promise of tomorrow hung heavy and thrilling in the air between them. When he returned her to the Vance home, the Duke handed her down from the carriage with proper decorum. Yet as her feet touched the pavement, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his fingers pressing something into her palm. "Until tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying a promise. Inside her gloved hand she found a small, ornate key with a ribbon tied around it. Only when she was alone in her bedroom did she examine it more closely, finding a tiny note attached to the ribbon. "For the lock on your heart. The question remains whether you will use it." Seraphina pressed the key to her lips, understanding the symbolism. The Duke, Richard, was offering her access to his guarded heart, while acknowledging the choice remained hers. That night, sleep eluded her. She paced her bedroom, the key clutched in her hand, weighing the implications of the morning to come. Marriage to the Duke would elevate her to the highest ranks of society, grant her influence and security, and connect her to a man who increasingly occupied her thoughts, and if she were honest with herself, her heart. Yet questions lingered. Could she truly know a man after mere weeks of formal courtship? Would the passion he stirred in her sustain through years of marriage? And most significantly, could she maintain her identity and independence as the Duchess of Blackwood? As dawn broke over London, Eve made her decision. Whatever her answer would be, she would give it honestly, with full awareness of the path she was choosing. The Duke arrived at precisely 11 o'clock, dressed impeccably in a formal morning coat that emphasized his imposing height. Lady Millicent, barely containing her excitement, received him in the drawing room, while Miss Eliza hovered nearby, eyes bright with anticipation. Eve entered last, composed in a day dress of deep blue that complemented her complexion and dark chestnut hair. Their eyes met across the room, and for a fleeting moment the bustling household faded, leaving only a palpable connection. "Your Grace," Lady Millicent gushed, "what a pleasure to receive you this morning." Alaric acknowledged her with a bow, then turned to Eve, his gaze lingering, a flicker of vulnerability in his usually guarded expression. "Lady Millicent, Miss Vance, Lady Seraphina," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent in his other greetings. "I've come on a matter of great importance." He looked directly at Seraphina. "Over these past weeks, I've had the privilege of becoming acquainted with your niece. I find her to be a woman of exceptional quality, intelligent, principled, and possessed of a rare spirit that I have come to admire deeply." Lady Millicent beamed, while Eliza clasped her hands in breathless anticipation. The Duke turned fully to Seraphina now, moving closer, his hand reaching for hers. "Lady Seraphina, Eve," he murmured, his thumb tracing a gentle circle on her gloved hand. I believe we could build something extraordinary together, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I am asking for the honor of your hand in marriage, with your aunt's blessing. Though she had anticipated the moment, hearing the words spoken aloud made Seraphina's heart race. She looked into his eyes, searching for any doubt, any hesitation, but found only certainty and something softer, a vulnerability he showed to no one else. Yet, she could not ignore the questions that had plagued her. Before I answer, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, I must know, will you allow me to remain myself, to maintain my opinions, my interests, my voice? Marriage often requires women to become shadows of their husbands. Alaric's grip on her hand tightened, his gaze earnest. I am not asking for a shadow, he replied, his voice firm. I'm asking for a companion, a partner. Your voice is precisely what drew me to you, Eve. I would never ask you to silence it. Lady Millicent made a small, choked sound of distress at this unconventional exchange, but Seraphina ignored her, focused entirely on the man before her. And my independence, my property, will remain yours, she pressed, secured legally before our marriage? I've already instructed my solicitors to draw up the documents, he promised, his eyes holding hers. Seraphina took a deep breath, searching her heart one final time. In his eyes, she saw not the cold, imposing duke of public reputation, but the man she had come to know. Complex, demanding, but also capable of great tenderness and a revolutionary understanding. Then yes, she said clearly, her voice ringing with conviction. I will marry you, Richard. His face transformed with a smile of genuine joy, perhaps the first she had seen from him without reservation or guard. He brought her hand to his lips, the touch sending a jolt of warmth through her entire body. How you have made me the happiest of men, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Lady Millicent burst into excited chatter about arrangements, seasons, and trousseau, while Eliza rushed to embrace her cousin, tears of happiness in her eyes. Yet Seraphina hardly heard them, her attention fixed on Richard's face, on the promise and challenge she saw there. The engagement of Duke Alaric Blackwood to Lady Seraphina Vance dominated London society's attention throughout the summer of 1885. The wedding was set for September, a rapid timeline by aristocratic standards, but one that suited the Duke's decisive nature and Seraphina's practical temperament. Preparations consumed the Vance household. Lady Millicent alternated between ecstatic planning and nervous fretting over every detail. Eliza assisted with endless fittings and correspondence, while privately lamenting that her own prospects paled in comparison to her cousin's magnificent match. Seraphina approached her impending nuptials with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Richard called daily, their conversations growing more intimate as the formality of courtship gave way to the deeper connection of betrothal. Yet she couldn't help noticing that for all their increased closeness, parts of his life remained closed to her, particularly anything concerning the west wing of Westcliff Abbey, where his first wife had died. Will we reside primarily in London, or at Westcliff Abbey after the wedding? She asked one afternoon as they strolled through the garden of Blackwood House, his London residence. Mrs. Gable followed at a discreet distance, providing the necessary chaperonage. Both, according to the season, Richard replied, though Westcliff Abbey requires some preparation before it becomes our primary residence. The West Wing, Seraphina said, watching his expression carefully. His face tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, it has remained closed since Rosamond's death. I've instructed the staff to begin renovations, new furnishings, new decorations. Nothing will remain as it was. Is that necessary? Seraphina probed gently. It seems almost like trying to erase the past. Not erase, he corrected, his voice tight. But I won't have you living in the shadow of tragedy. Westcliff Abbey should be a place of new beginnings for us, not haunted by what came before. He avoided her gaze, focusing on a distant rosebush. Seraphina touched his arm gently. Richard, I'm not afraid of the past. I don't need to be protected from it. He covered her hand with his fingers closing tightly. It's not merely for your protection, Eve. He hesitated, then admitted quietly. I haven't entered that wing since the day they removed her body. I'm not certain I can." The vulnerability in his confession touched her deeply. "Then we'll face it together," she promised, her voice soft but firm. "Before the wedding. We'll walk through it together, and then decide what changes are needed." He studied her with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. Most women would demand the entire wing be demolished rather than live where such tragedy occurred. "I'm not most women," she finished with the ghost of a smile. "I'm well aware and increasingly grateful for it." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Very well. We'll visit Westcliff Abbey next week, together." A week later, Seraphina found herself on a bustling, modest street in East London. Dressed in a practical, unadorned gown and a simple bonnet, she was virtually unrecognizable as the future Duchess of Blackwood. Mrs. Gable, equally discreetly dressed, accompanied her. They entered a converted shopfront, its windows now displaying neatly lettered signs: the Women's Literary Circle and Lending Library. Inside, the air hummed with quiet industry. Women of all ages, from seamstresses to laundresses, sat at tables, engrossed in books or conversed in hushed tones. Lady Seraphina, a bright-eyed young woman, greeted her, rising from a desk piled high with ledgers. It was Miss Eleanor Croft, Silas's intelligent and dedicated sister, whom Seraphina had secretly hired to manage the establishment. The new acquisitions are proving immensely popular, especially Mrs. Gaskell's works, and our outreach program for basic literacy has already enrolled a dozen new members. Seraphina smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Excellent, Eleanor. We must ensure a steady supply of new titles. These women deserve access to knowledge and stories as much as anyone." Seeing the eager faces, the quiet dignity of women immersed in learning, filled Seraphina with a profound sense of purpose. This was her rebellion, her quiet revolution. As they prepared to leave the library, Mrs. Gable murmured, "It is a wonderful endeavor, my lady, but the secrecy weighs on me. If word were to get out—" Seraphina sighed, fastening her bonnet. "I know, Mrs. Gable, it is a risk. But imagine the difference it makes here. These women, denied education, denied a voice. This library gives them both." She glanced around the humble but bustling space. "I believe in its importance too deeply to abandon it." A subtle frown touched her brow. "I wonder how Richard would truly react if he discovered my involvement. He speaks of partnership, of valuing my mind, but a duchess funding a library for working-class women in East London? It is hardly conventional." The thought brought a prickle of anxiety, but also a renewed determination to see her project thrive. One evening in late August, Seraphina returned from a final fitting of her wedding gown to find a visitor waiting in the drawing room. Simmons announced, "Lady Seraphina, Lady Isolde Blackwood to see you." Seraphina entered with cautious curiosity. The name Blackwood, Richard's family name, suggested a relation, though he had mentioned none. Lady Isolde was a striking woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, but with a hardness in her eyes that contrasted sharply with her polite, if cool, smile. "Lady Isolde," Seraphina acknowledged with a polite curtsy. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No," the woman agreed, her voice cultured but cool. "My nephew has been remarkably silent regarding my existence." "Your nephew?" Seraphina repeated, understanding dawning. "You're the Duke's aunt." "His father's younger sister," Lady Isolde confirmed, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. "Please sit. I believe we have matters to discuss that concern you greatly." Seraphina sat, maintaining her composure despite the unexpected encounter and the sudden unease that settled over her. "The Duke hasn't mentioned you." "I'm not surprised. We've been estranged since Rosamond's death." Lady Isolde's expression grew somber. "Which is precisely why I've come to see you, Lady Seraphina. I believe there are things you should know before you marry my nephew." Weariness crept through Seraphina. "With all due respect, Lady Isolde, anything concerning my future husband should come from him directly. And if he has deliberately kept certain truths from you, truths that might affect your decision to bind yourself to him, Lady Isolde leaned forward, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "Did he tell you that Rosamond was with child when she died?" The revelation struck Seraphina like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her throat, her breath catching. "No," she admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper. "He did not." "Did he tell you that they argued violently the day before her death, that servants heard him threaten to have her committed to an asylum if she didn't behave as befitted a duchess?" Isolde pressed on relentlessly, her eyes unwavering. "I don't believe—" "Did he tell you?" Lady Isolde interrupted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "That Rosamond wrote to me the week before she died, expressing fear for her safety and that of her unborn child?" The opulent drawing room suddenly felt cold, the weight of the accusation suffocating. Seraphina stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "Lady Isolde, I must ask you to stop. Whatever grievances exist between you and the Duke, I will not be used as an instrument in them." The older woman rose as well, her expression hardening, though a flicker of raw pain crossed her features. "You think me vindictive, motivated by some petty family squabble?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I assure you, Lady Seraphina, my only concern is preventing another tragedy. Rosamond was my niece, my sister's daughter, and I loved her dearly. And the child, the unborn child, was to be the first of a new generation. I carry the guilt of not protecting her, of not listening to her pleas." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded letter, its edges soft with age. "Rosamond's last letter to me. Read it, then decide whether my warnings merit consideration. Her despair, her fear, it is all there." Isolde's pained expression, contrasting with the hardened glint in her eyes, painted a tragic picture of a woman consumed by grief and guilt, desperately seeking validation for her accusations. Seraphina stared at the offered letter, conflict warring within her. The weight of Isolde's grief was palpable, yet her loyalty to Richard, despite the omissions, held firm. "I cannot accept this," she said finally, her voice strained. "If there are questions to be asked about Rosamond's death, I will ask them of my fiancé directly." Lady Isolde studied her with a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect. "You're either remarkably loyal or remarkably naive, Lady Seraphina. I hope for your sake it's the former." She returned the ominous letter to her reticule. "Should you change your mind, I'm staying at Claridge's until the end of the week." After the unwelcome visitor departed, Seraphina sat alone in the drawing room, her thoughts in turmoil. Richard had spoken of Rosamond's mental instability, her gambling, the difficulties of their marriage, but he had never mentioned a pregnancy. Was it an omission of painful memory or something more deliberate? Her doubt, genuine and disquieting, lingered. That evening she sent a note to Blackwood House, requesting Richard call on her the following morning on a matter of importance. She passed a restless night, tossing and turning, the shadows in her room mirroring the turmoil in her heart. She was torn between loyalty to the man she had agreed to marry and the unsettling questions raised by his estranged aunt. The omission of the pregnancy was a gaping hole in Richard's confession, a secret that gnawed at her. Before she confronted him, however, Seraphina knew she needed to seek some independent verification. Her progressive mind demanded more than one biased account. She would discreetly investigate Isolde's claims herself, seeking truth before judgment. The following day, under the guise of visiting a charitable institution, Seraphina, accompanied by a nervous Mrs. Gable, embarked on a series of discreet inquiries. In a less conspicuous carriage, they navigated London's labyrinthine streets, seeking out former servants from Westcliff Abbey and distant acquaintances who might have known Rosamond. Seraphina, using a fictional name in a carefully crafted story of genealogical research, posed subtle questions. "I understand the late Duchess was rather delicate," she'd inquire, or, "Were there any particular challenges in managing the household during her time?" The fragmented information she uncovered was unsettlingly ambiguous. One former maid spoke of Rosamond's flights of fancy and terrible rages, confirming her erratic behavior. Another hinted at the Duke's strictness and unyielding demands, suggesting a coldness that could indeed drive a sensitive woman to despair. A distant cousin recalled Rosamond's unfortunate gambling habits, but also mentioned her fear of confinement. Each hushed answer, each averted glance, added to a mosaic of conflicting reports. Seraphina returned home with more questions than answers, the ambiguity of her findings only deepening her genuine doubt. Later that afternoon, in the quiet privacy of her sitting room, Seraphina spread out her scattered notes, reviewing them with Mrs. Gable. "It's all so inconclusive," Seraphina sighed, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Some points align with Lady Isolde's accusations, hinting at Richard's harshness. Others corroborate his account of Rosamond's instability. There's no clear villain, no easy truth," Mrs. Gable, ever observant, offered quietly. "Perhaps the truth, my lady, is rarely simple, and those who carry grief often see only what confirms their pain." Seraphina nodded, but her heart remained troubled. The omission of the pregnancy, coupled with the conflicting whispers she had gathered, created a genuine moment of doubt. Could she truly trust Richard, despite her growing affection? Was she brave enough to face the full, unvarnished truth? The quiet tension in the room was palpable, a reflection of the storm raging within her. Richard arrived early the following morning, concern evident in his expression as Simmons showed him into the morning room where Seraphina waited alone. She had asked her aunt and cousin to give them privacy, a scandalous request given the hour, but one Lady Millicent had reluctantly granted, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Your note sounded urgent," he said, foregoing formal greetings, his steel-blue eyes searching her face. "Are you unwell?" "I'm quite well," she assured him, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She gestured for him to sit opposite her. "But something has happened that I must discuss with you." His posture was rigid, his gaze intense, betraying an underlying anxiety. The moment of truth had arrived. "I received a visitor yesterday," Seraphina began, her voice calm and even. "Your aunt, Lady Isolde Blackwood." The change in his demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His body tensed, his expression closing like a door slamming shut. The warmth that had been present moments before vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "Isolde came here," he asked, his voice low and dangerous, "to my fiancé's home, without my knowledge?" "She did," Seraphina confirmed, watching him carefully. "She had concerns about our marriage." "About you." She took a deep breath. "She implied there were truths I should know." His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "She oversteps her bounds entirely. What mischief has she been spreading now?" His anger, though controlled, was palpable, a stark contrast to his earlier vulnerability. Seraphina chose her next words carefully, her gaze unwavering. "Richard," she said softly, "she told me that Rosamond was with child when she died. Is that true?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly, heavy and agonizing. Richard stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. The air in the room crackled with unspoken pain and unspoken truth. He stared out at the bustling street, seeing nothing, lost in a past he desperately wished to keep buried. Seraphina watched him, her own breath held, the weight of the moment almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but threaded with raw pain. "Yes," he admitted, his back still to her. "Rosamond was 4 months pregnant when she took her life." "Why didn't you tell me?" Seraphina asked softly. The question a gentle lament. He turned back to face her, his expression haunted, his steel-blue eyes filled with a grief she hadn't seen before. "Because it remains the greatest failure of my life that I couldn't protect my wife or my unborn child from Rosamond's demons." His voice broke slightly. "And because I feared how you would judge me for it. I feared you would see me as others did." "Judge you?" she repeated, her voice filled with compassion. "Richard, I would never." "Isolde believes I drove Rosamond to suicide," he interrupted, his voice bitter. "She believes I was a monstrous husband who cared nothing for my wife's well-being, who threatened her with asylum when she became inconvenient." His laugh was harsh and mirthless. "She conveniently forgets that Rosamond had already attempted to harm herself twice before that final day, that the asylum was recommended by physicians as the only way to keep her safe until the child was born. A desperate measure, yes, but one advised by doctors, not a cruel decree from a neglectful husband. His hardened expression spoke of years spent fighting these accusations, of a battle he'd thought long over. Seraphina rose and moved to him, taking his hands in hers. His fingers tightened around hers as though drawing strength from the connection, his body still rigid with tension. "Tell me what truly happened, Richard," she urged softly, her gaze unwavering. "All of it." He closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering the courage to relive the nightmare. Rosamond's condition worsened significantly with the pregnancy. Her moods became more volatile, her gambling more desperate. Dr. Alistair, a respected physician, believed she suffered from a profound condition of the mind that sometimes affects women in pregnancy, exacerbated by her existing fragility. He opened his eyes, the pain still raw. Her family, desperate to hide her episodes of melancholy and rage, had presented her as the perfect aristocratic daughter. They needed her married to wealth to save themselves from her father's poor investments. They knew what they were doing. "The night before she died," he continued, his voice growing rough with emotion, "she had lost an enormous sum, money that was meant for the child's trust. When I confronted her, she became hysterical, threatening to harm herself, as she had before." "And you threatened to have her committed?" Seraphina asked gently, recalling Isolde's accusation. "I told her that if she couldn't control her impulses, if she couldn't promise to seek help, I would have no choice but to follow the doctor's recommendation for confinement, for her safety and the child's." "It wasn't a threat, Eve. It was desperation, a desperate hope to keep them both alive." He looked away, his jaw tight. "The next day, I went to London to speak with specialists about further treatment options. When I returned, they had already found her, in the bathing chamber." The pain in his voice was raw, unfeigned, the memory clearly a torment. Seraphina reached up to touch his face, gently turning it toward hers. Her thumb brushed away an unspoken tear from the corner of his eye. "I believe you," she said simply, her voice unwavering. Something in his expression shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible change. Relief, gratitude, and a vulnerability he rarely showed flickered across his features. It was not absolution, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall of guilt he had built around himself for 5 long years. Her belief was a balm to his wounded soul. "Eleanor never forgave me," he said, his voice quieter now, the bitterness a dull ache rather than a sharp wound. She and Rosamond had been close, and in her grief, she needed someone to blame. I was the convenient target. "Eleanor is grieving too, in her own way," Seraphina replied, her tone empathetic. "Grief makes us seek answers, assign blame, when sometimes there are no satisfying explanations." Rosamond's mind was unwell, Richard. Her choices were her own, however influenced by her troubled state. You did everything a husband could reasonably do for a wife, suffering as she was. His thoughtful expression showed that her words, born of insight and compassion, were beginning to penetrate the rigid foundation of his guilt. He caught her hands again, holding them firmly. "I have never raised a hand to a woman. I never would. Whatever my faults, and they are many, cruelty is not among them." Seraphina studied his face, the pain in his eyes, the sincerity in his expression. Whatever had happened with Rosamond, she believed in her heart that the man before her was not capable of driving his wife to suicide. Complicated, demanding, sometimes harsh in his judgments? Yes, but not cruel, not monstrous. "I believe you," she repeated. "But Richard, there can be no more secrets between us, not if we're to build the partnership you spoke of." He nodded slowly, his gaze holding hers. "No more secrets," he agreed, "which is why we should go to Westcliff Abbey tomorrow, as planned. It's time to confront the past fully, before we begin our future." Lady Millicent Vance had protested the entire journey, her voice a reedy lament from the carriage seat opposite Seraphina. "Visiting his country estate before the wedding? It is quite beyond the pale, Seraphina. What will society say?" But Duke Alaric Blackwood, seated beside Seraphina with a quiet resolve that brooked no argument, had merely stated it was necessary for practical planning of their future home. And so, the carriage rolled on, bearing them deeper into the Kentish countryside. As they passed through the ancient iron gates of Westcliff Abbey, the familiar drive, lined with towering oaks, felt different now. It was no longer just a grand estate. It was a place imbued with new significance, a site of both their future and the profound tragedy of Alaric's past. Seraphina caught her first glimpse of the golden Palladian mansion, its windows glinting under the spring sun, beautiful yet somehow foreboding. She noted the workmen already on the west side of the mansion, beginning the renovations Richard had ordered, a physical manifestation of his attempt to rebuild, to erase, or perhaps merely to transform. As their carriage drew to a halt before the grand entrance, Alaric turned to Seraphina, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, despite the activity around them. "Are you certain about this, Seraphina? We can still postpone this visit until after the wedding if you wish." His eyes held a flicker of the apprehension she knew he felt. Seraphina met his gaze steadily, her hand finding his where it rested on her lap. "I'm certain, Richard. We face this together now, so it doesn't stand between us in the future." His lips thinned for a moment. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, accepting her resolve. He understood that for her, this was not merely a gesture, but a necessary step in their partnership. The entrance hall of Westcliff Abbey, with its polished marble floors and soaring ceilings, welcomed them with a formal silence. Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper, a woman with a starched cap and keen eyes, greeted them with impeccable respect, though Seraphina noted the flicker of curiosity in her gaze as she was introduced as the future Duchess. "Tea will be served in the blue drawing-room in an hour, Your Grace," Mrs. Porter informed them. "The West Wing has been opened as requested, though the renovations have only just begun." "Thank you, Mrs. Porter," Alaric replied, his voice even. "We won't require accompaniment." The housekeeper curtsied and withdrew, leaving Seraphina, Alaric, Mrs. Gable, and Silas Croft standing at the foot of the grand staircase. Bridget and Oliver remained in the entrance hall, offering a minimum of propriety, while allowing the couple a measure of privacy for their difficult task. As Alaric offered his arm and they ascended the staircase, turning towards the west wing, Seraphina sensed an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Where the main house was lived in, maintained with care and attention, the west wing felt suspended in time, the air stale despite efforts to air it out, the furnishings covered in sheets like shrouded ghosts, the wallpaper slightly faded where sunlight had touched it through closed curtains, hinting at forgotten vibrancy. Alaric's steps slowed markedly as they approached a set of heavy double doors at the end of the corridor. His breathing had become shallow, a barely perceptible hitch in his chest, and his grip on Seraphina's arm tightened unconsciously, a silent plea for support. "These were her rooms," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled, a strained whisper. "The Duchess's suite." Seraphina's heart ached for him. She placed her hand over his where it rested on her arm. "We can turn back if it's too difficult, Richard." He shook his head, a single, decisive movement. "No," he managed, his jaw clenched. "No, it needs to be done." With visible effort, he reached for the ornate brass door handle and pushed it open, revealing the shadowed interior. The suite beyond was spacious, and had once been elegant, even beneath the dust covers draped over furniture and with the heavy curtains half drawn. A sitting room led to a bedchamber, and beyond that, a dressing room and a white-tiled bathing chamber. It was there, in that stark, clinical space, with its large porcelain tub, that Alaric finally stopped. His face was ashen, drained, of all color, his eyes fixed on some unseen point. "This is where they found her," he said quietly, his voice a ghost of its usual strength. The water still warm. His gaze shifted, unfocused, reliving the horrific discovery. Too late to save either of them. In the quiet solemnity of that room, Seraphina could almost feel the weight of what had happened, the despair that had driven a troubled young woman to such a final, desperate act, and the unborn child who never had a chance at life. Seraphina squeezed his hand, offering silent, steadfast support. The grief radiating from him was palpable, a cold, suffocating wave. "It wasn't your fault, Richard," she said softly, her voice a gentle balm in the heavy air. "You couldn't have known what she would do, couldn't have controlled her illness." Alaric's head snapped up, his eyes raw with pain and a harsh self-recrimination. "Couldn't I?" he retorted, his voice thick with bitterness. "I was her husband. Her protection was my duty, even from herself. I knew she was unstable. I knew she had threatened harm before. I shouldn't have left her alone, not even for a day. You were seeking help for her, Seraphina reminded him, stepping closer, her hand reaching to take both of his, firm and warm in her grasp. Acting on medical advice? You couldn't have stayed by her side every single moment, Richard. Not when you were trying to secure a future for her and your child. He looked away, his eyes haunted. I failed them both, Eve. My wife, my child. What kind of husband, what kind of father does that make me? In that moment, Seraphina understood the true profound purpose of this agonizing visit. It wasn't merely to exorcise ghosts or prepare for renovation, but for Richard to finally confront the crushing guilt he had carried for 5 long years, to speak it aloud to someone who might offer absolution, or at least understanding. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering as she guided his face to meet hers. It makes you human, Richard, she said simply, softly. Fallible, like all of us. You did everything a husband could reasonably do for a wife suffering as Rosamond was. You have punished yourself far too long for failing to achieve the impossible. A visible tremor ran through him, a subtle but profound shift, perhaps the first crack in the rigid foundation of his guilt. He drew her into his arms then, a desperate, raw embrace, holding her as though she were a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. His face was buried in her hair, his body trembling slightly with the force of his long-suppressed grief. They stood together in that room of tragedy, finding connection and comfort where there had been only pain and isolation. Seraphina held him, stroking his back, letting him lean on her strength. "We'll make this house live again," she promised softly, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Not by erasing the past, but by building a future alongside it. Rosamond and your child will always be part of your story, Richard, but they needn't be its ending. They will be a part of the foundation, not the whole structure." He pulled back slightly, his eyes still raw but now filled with a bewildered wonder as he looked at her. "How did I find you, Seraphina Vance?" he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. She offered him a gentle, knowing smile, tracing the line of his jaw with her thumb. "You claimed me with a single gaze across the opera house, Richard, but I claimed you in return." And with that, they left the West Wing, hand in hand, the air somehow lighter between them. The crushing weight of the past, not gone, perhaps, but certainly eased, brought into the light rather than left to lurk in shadow. The final preparations for their wedding were a whirlwind, but amidst the flurry of fittings and correspondence, a new, insidious tension began to brew. Across London, in a dimly lit corner of a notoriously exclusive private club, Lord and Lady Ashworth were engaged in a whispered conspiracy. The Duke Blackwood and his unconventional Lady Vance, Lady Ashworth purred, a predatory gleam in her eyes as she lifted a glass of champagne. Such an improbable match, wouldn't you agree, my dear? Lord Ashworth, a man whose influence rivaled Alaric's own, though his wealth was more recently acquired, merely grunted, his gaze fixed on a distant chessboard. Improbable indeed, and inconvenient, their union could solidify the Blackwood holdings beyond challenge. They resented the ancient prestige of the Blackwoods, viewing Alaric's engagement to Seraphina as a dangerous consolidation of power. "I've heard whispers," Lady Ashworth continued, "of Lady Seraphina's charitable interests. A certain reading circle for working women in the East End. Rather radical, wouldn't you say, especially for a duchess to be?" Her husband's eyes sharpened. "And the Duke's past?" Still ripe with speculation, even after all these years. A delicate blend, wouldn't you say? Enough to sow seeds of doubt among the more traditional guests. Their plan was subtle, a careful cultivation of polite society's prejudices, designed to cast shadows upon the upcoming union. As the pre-wedding week unfolded, Seraphina began to notice the subtle shifts. At afternoon teas and evening soirees, conversations would veer towards general topics of charity, then pivot with seemingly innocent questions about how a lady of quality might best occupy her time. A few guests, particularly older dowagers with pinched expressions, offered thinly veiled inquiries about her more progressive inclinations. Lady Millicent, delighted by the general buzz surrounding the impending nuptials, dismissed it as mere envy. Such a magnificent match, my dear. Of course they are jealous. But Seraphina felt an undercurrent of judgment, a prickle of unease. Then, at a crowded garden party, a particularly nosy Lady Fitzwilliam leaned in conspiratorially. My dear Lady Seraphina, I hear you have quite the passion for literacy, a delightful reading circle for working women, I believe. The smile was too sweet, the tone too knowing. Seraphina's heart gave a jolt. Her secret project was no longer a secret. Later that evening, in the quiet sanctuary of her private sitting room, Seraphina recounted the unsettling encounters to Mrs. Gable. Her companion, ever observant, frowned. I overheard Lady Ashworth at the milliner's just yesterday, my lady. She spoke quite disparagingly of unconventional interests and ladies who forget their station, all while pretending to admire your gown. Seraphina's jaw tightened. She connected the dots with chilling precision. The Ashworths, their long-standing rivalry with the Blackwoods, their thinly veiled ambition. It was a deliberate, malicious campaign. A cold dread settled in her stomach. They mean to sabotage us, she murmured, her voice laced with anger. To use my literary circle and Richard's past against us. What will this do to Richard, to our union? The thought of her progressive work, meant for good, being twisted into a weapon against them, infuriated her. 2 evenings before the wedding, as shadows lengthened across Thornbury House, Seraphina found Alaric in his study. Her heart pounded, but she knew she had to speak. Richard, she began, her voice a little shaky, there are whispers circulating about my reading circles and certain malicious interpretations of my involvement. She watched his face, trying to gauge his reaction. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, a familiar mask of aristocratic composure. For a tense moment, she feared his disapproval, feared that her progressive passion would become a wedge between them. Then, he simply nodded. I am well aware of your endeavors, Seraphina. He leaned back in his leather chair, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. Silas has kept me informed of your charitable interests since their inception. He believes strongly in your vision. Seraphina stared, surprised, then a wave of profound relief washed over her. He had known all along, and he hadn't judged. His calm acceptance, his quiet trust, was a powerful affirmation of their partnership. Alaric rose, moving to a large map of London society connections spread across his desk. Silas Croft, who had been quietly organizing papers by the fireplace, stepped forward. The Ashworths have been particularly vocal, Alaric stated, his voice devoid of emotion yet firm. A long-standing rivalry, fueled by envy of the Blackwood name and a desire to see us stumble. They believe striking now, before our union is fully cemented, is their best chance. He looked at Seraphina, his eyes piercing. How do you wish to handle this, Seraphina? This is our challenge to face, together. Her agency, her voice, was paramount, even in this strategic discussion, Seraphina considered. We must not give them the satisfaction of a public fracas, but we must also not appear weak. They conferred, a quiet, formidable force. Their strategy was subtle but decisive. A few strategically placed remarks from their allies, a unified and confident appearance at all pre-wedding events, and a quiet, dignified dismissal of any direct questions. Their united front would speak louder than any whispered slander. Silas nodded in agreement, a rare smile on his face, observing the powerful bond between them. The day before the wedding, a package arrived for Seraphina at the Vance residence, a handsome jewelry case bearing the distinctive Blackwood crest. Her heart fluttered with anticipation. She opened it, expecting the traditional family diamonds, perhaps a necklace worn by generations of Blackwood duchesses. Instead, nestled on velvet, was a delicate necklace of sapphires and pearls, shimmering with a soft, ethereal glow. Attached was a small, elegant note in Richard's strong, decisive hand. Not a family heirloom, Seraphina, but the beginning of our own traditions. Something new, like the life we will build together. Yours, Richard. The gesture touched her deeply. It was a promise not to overshadow their marriage with the past, but to forge their own path, their own legacy. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as though even the notoriously fickle English weather approved of their union. St. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled with London's elite, eager to witness the marriage of the enigmatic Duke of Blackwood to the spirited Lady Seraphina Vance. In the small anteroom where Seraphina prepared, Miss Eliza Vance adjusted the delicate veil of Brussels lace, while Mrs. Gable secured the final pins in her elaborate coiffure. "You look absolutely radiant," Eliza sighed, stepping back to admire her cousin. "The Duke won't be able to take his eyes off you." Seraphina studied her reflection in the mirror. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and hand-embroidered flowers, its modest neckline adorned with the sapphire and pearl necklace Richard had given her. She touched it gently, drawing strength from the symbol of their new beginning. "Are you nervous?" Mrs. Gable asked softly. "Strangely, no," Seraphina replied, a profound certainty settling in her heart. "I feel certain." Despite the whirlwind courtship, despite the shadows they had confronted together, she felt an absolute rightness about the step she was taking. A gentle knock at the door revealed her uncle, Lord James Vance, who had traveled from his estate to give her away in her late father's stead. "It's time, my dear," he said, his eyes widening appreciatively at the sight of her. "By Jove, you're the image of your mother on her wedding day." Seraphina took her uncle's offered arm, her heart beginning to race, not with doubt, but with anticipation. The music swelled as the church doors opened, and she caught her first glimpse of the nave, filled with guests, a sea of expectant faces. At the altar, tall and commanding in his formal attire, stood Richard, Oliver at his side, as best man. As she began her slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, Richard turned. The look on his face as he saw her, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and unmistakable love, stripped bare of his usual reserve, confirmed everything she needed to know. This man, complicated and sometimes difficult as he might be, loved her truly, not as a possession or an ornament, but as the partner she was determined to be. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient vows and timeless promises. When Richard slipped the wedding band on her finger, a simple circle of gold set with tiny sapphires to match her necklace, their eyes met in a moment of private connection amid the public spectacle. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "With my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow." These were traditional words, spoken by countless grooms throughout history. Yet Seraphina felt their significance anew, a covenant rather than mere ritual. This was a promise between equals, despite what law and society might dictate, a partnership forged in honesty and understanding. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, Richard's kiss was proper and brief, as befitted the sacred setting. His lips brushed hers, a chaste, formal acknowledgment of their new bond. Yet his eyes, steel blue and intense, held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary, promising much more to come when they were finally and truly alone. The official pronouncement had been made. The private journey was about to begin. The wedding breakfast at Thornbury House was a lavish affair, with hundreds of guests offering congratulations to the new Duchess of Blackwood. Seraphina moved through the crowd with newfound confidence, a radiant smile on her face, her hand often finding Richard's as they navigated the social obligations of the day together. During a rare moment of relative privacy, as they stood in a window alcove, Richard whispered, his voice low and intimate, "You're magnificent, Duchess. Every man here envies me, and every woman studies you for flaws they won't find." "Such flattery, Your Grace," she replied with a small, playful smile. "One might think you were still trying to win my favor." "Always," he said simply, the single word carrying more meaning than elaborate declarations might have. His gaze was warm, adoring. As the celebration continued, Seraphina noticed a late arrival. Lady Isolde Blackwood stood near the entrance, her elegant figure framed by the grand doorway, a hesitation evident in her bearing. Richard followed Seraphina's gaze, his body tensing almost imperceptibly as he spotted his aunt. "She came," he said, a flicker of surprise in his voice. "I sent her an invitation," Seraphina admitted softly, her hand gently touching his arm. "I thought perhaps it was time for healing to begin." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "Shall we greet her together?" Seraphina suggested, her voice gentle but firm. After a moment's hesitation, Richard nodded. They crossed the crowded room together, approaching Isolde with united purpose. The older woman's expression was guarded, but lacked the hostility of their previous encounter. "Aunt Isolde," Richard acknowledged, his tone formal but not cold. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't certain my presence would be welcome," she replied cautiously, her eyes assessing, moving between Richard and Seraphina. "But I couldn't stay away from my only nephew's wedding, despite our differences." Seraphina stepped forward, offering a warm, gracious smile. "We're glad you're here, Lady Isolde. Family should be together on such days, even when there have been misunderstandings and sorrows." Isolde's gaze lingered on Seraphina, then softened almost imperceptibly. "You make a striking couple," she said finally, her voice more gentle than before. I hope you find happiness, Richard. Rosamond would have wanted that for you, despite everything." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning, an olive branch extended where there had been only bitterness before. Richard inclined his head in acknowledgement. Years of hurt were not erased, but perhaps they were beginning to heal. "Join us," he said, gesturing toward the celebration. "Meet my wife properly, without shadows between us." As evening approached, Seraphina retreated upstairs with Mrs. Gable to change into her traveling costume for their departure to Westcliff Abbey, where they would spend a brief honeymoon before embarking on a longer wedding journey to Italy. Alone in the guest chamber that had been prepared for her use, Seraphina found herself suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been during the ceremony or reception. A knock at the door revealed Eliza, who had come to bid her cousin farewell before the departure. "Are you terribly anxious?" Eliza asked, sitting on the edge of the bed as Seraphina changed into a traveling suit of deep green wool. Seraphina paused, adjusting her bodice. "A little," she admitted honestly. "It's rather like standing at the edge of uncharted waters, isn't it? One can read all the maps in existence, but it's not the same as the actual voyage." Eliza laughed softly, a genuine sound. "What a very Seraphina way of describing it." Her expression grew more serious. "He seems a good man, Richard, despite what people whisper. The way he looks at you, it's not how most aristocratic husbands regard their wives." "No," Seraphina agreed, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's not." "Write to me," Eliza insisted, embracing her cousin. Not about the private aspects, of course, but about how it feels to be a duchess, to be mistress of Westcliff." "I will," Seraphina promised, returning the embrace warmly. "And you must visit soon. Richard has promised to host a hunting party in October. You must convince Aunt Millicent to accept the invitation." Too soon, it was time to depart. The guests lined the entrance of Thornbury House, offering good wishes and showering the newlyweds with rice and flower petals as they entered the ducal carriage. Richard handed Seraphina in first, his touch warm and reassuring, then took his place beside her, raising a hand in farewell as the driver set the horses in motion. The cheers and well wishes faded into the distance as the carriage rolled away, carrying them towards their new life, leaving the noise and scrutiny of London society behind. As London's gas lamps began to flicker into life, giving way to the darkening countryside, a comfortable silence settled within the ducal carriage. Richard, Duke Alaric Blackwood, reached across the velvet seat for Seraphina's hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that had become a familiar comfort during their courtship. The last of the wedding guests' cheers had faded, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of hooves on the road. He turned his head, studying her face in the fading light. "Are you tired?" he murmured, his voice gentle. "It's been a long day." Seraphina leaned her head back against the plush upholstery, feeling the profound shift from public spectacle to private intimacy. "A little," she admitted, her thumb tracing a soft pattern on the back of his hand. "But happily so." The quiet strength in her voice resonated with him. Richard's lips quirked into one of his rare, genuine smiles, transforming his severe features into something unexpectedly handsome. "You were magnificent today, Duchess," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Every man here envies me, and every woman studies you for flaws they won't find." Seraphina laughed softly, a sound that warmed the carriage's interior. "Such flattery, Your Grace. One might think you were still trying to win my favor." His smile deepened, his eyes holding hers. "Always," he replied simply, the single word carrying more meaning than elaborate declarations. "I'm still learning what that means," she confessed, her gaze meeting his. "To be your Duchess, rather than just any duke's wife." His expression grew serious. "It means being precisely who you are, Seraphina. The woman who challenged me across an opera house, who demanded truth when others would accept comfortable lies, who walked into Rosamond's rooms with me and helped me face my darkest regrets. It means being my partner." Her heart swelled at his words, more potent and cherished than any conventional praise. "I meant what I said in the church today," she told him softly, her fingers tightening around his. "To love, honor, and cherish." A spark of amusement flickered in his steel-blue eyes. "Though I may interpret honor somewhat differently than most wives," she added, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. Richard's quiet laughter rumbled through his chest. "I expect nothing less, my dear. I didn't marry you for blind obedience, Seraphina. I married you for your mind as much as your heart, for precisely that unique interpretation." The landscape outside blurred as the carriage picked up speed, carrying them swiftly towards Westcliff Abbey, towards the beginning of their new life together. By the time they arrived at Westcliff Abbey, evening had fully descended, but the mansion's many windows glowed with welcoming light against the darkness. The staff had lined up in the grand entrance hall to greet their master and new mistress, offering congratulations with varying degrees of formality. Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper, presented Seraphina with a heavy ring of household keys, a symbolic gesture recognizing her new role as mistress of Westcliff. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the housekeeper said with a proper curtsy, her eyes alight with respectful curiosity. The word home resonated deeply within Seraphina as Richard led her up the grand staircase, not towards the west wing, which remained under renovation, but to the Duke's suite in the west wing, now their shared apartments. A new life, a new home. A light supper had been laid out in the private sitting room adjoining the bedchamber. Richard dismissed the servants with a wave of his hand, insisting they would serve themselves. When the door closed behind the last footman, a profound silence enveloped them, and they were truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. "Wine?" Richard offered, moving to pour from a crystal decanter, his movements deliberate. "Please," Seraphina replied, her voice a little breathless as she removed her traveling hat and gloves, placing them on a nearby table. He handed her a crystal goblet, their fingers brushing in the exchange, sending a familiar jolt through her. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his own glass. "To partnership," she countered, touching her glass to his with a soft chime. They sipped in companionable silence, both acutely aware of the bedchamber beyond the half-open door, but neither rushing towards it. Richard set down his glass and moved closer, reaching to touch the sapphire necklace at her throat. "These suit you," he observed, his voice a low rumble, "though not as well as your eyes suit me." Seraphina smiled at the unexpected poetry from her usually pragmatic husband. "You're full of surprises today, Your Grace." "Richard," he corrected, his fingers moving from the cool sapphires to the sensitive skin of her neck, tracing a feather-light path. "Always Richard, when we're alone." "Richard," she repeated softly, the name feeling natural on her tongue, her pulse quickening at his touch. His eyes darkened as he traced the line of her jaw. "I find I'm uncharacteristically nervous," he admitted, his voice a near whisper. "I want tonight to be perfect for you." The raw vulnerability in his confession touched her deeply. This powerful man, who commanded respect and often fear from others, was showing her a side no one else witnessed. She reached up to touch his face, drawing him closer. "It already is," she assured him, her gaze unwavering, "because it's the beginning of our story together." Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, exploratory, so different from the brief, formal kiss in the church. His hands framed her face with surprising tenderness, and hers found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his evening attire. The kiss deepened, a slow, intoxicating exploration that spoke of promises and shared futures. When they finally parted, his eyes held a question, a silent inquiry. In answer, Seraphina took his hand, her fingers firm around his, and led him towards the bedchamber where their life together would truly begin, a journey into uncharted, yet profoundly exciting, waters. Later, as moonlight streamed through the tall windows of the ducal suite, Seraphina lay in the circle of Richard's arms, her head resting on his chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. Their physical communion had been a revelation, not merely physical pleasure, though that had been profound, but a deeper connection that transcended words, a melding of souls as much as bodies. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That reality can sometimes exceed expectation," she replied honestly, her voice soft with contentment. His chest rumbled with quiet laughter beneath her ear. "High praise indeed, from a woman whose expectations are rarely modest, my Duchess." The warmth of his body, the scent of sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped her in a cocoon of safety and profound belonging. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, marveling at how different he appeared in this private moment, his features relaxed, dark hair tousled, the austere Duke transformed into simply her husband. "I was also thinking about Rosamond," she admitted softly. His body tensed slightly beneath her touch, the casual tracing on her shoulder stilling. "Why?" he asked, his voice guarded. "Because she's part of what made you the man I married today," Seraphina said carefully, her gaze tender. "The pain of losing her and your child shaped you, changed you. I wouldn't erase that history even if I could, because then you wouldn't be the Richard I've come to love. Your strength, your capacity for empathy, even your guardedness, they are all part of that journey." He was silent for a long moment, his hands stilling on her shoulder, his eyes searching hers. "You're a remarkable woman, Seraphina Blackwood," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, using her new married name for the first time. The sound of it, spoken by him in that intimate moment, resonated through her, cementing their union. "As you're a remarkable man, Richard Blackwood." She reciprocated softly, affirming their new shared identity, their intertwined fates. It was a powerful acknowledgement, a quiet vow that their pasts, however different, now converged in a singular, unbreakable future. The name, Blackwood, now felt like her own, not merely a title, but a badge of a love, hard-won and deeply cherished. She settled back against his chest, feeling his arms tighten around her. "We'll make new memories here," Seraphina promised softly, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "But we needn't pretend the old ones never existed." "No," he agreed softly, his chin resting on the top of her head. "But we'll ensure they don't overshadow what we build together." In the safety of his embrace, with the moonlight casting silver across the room, Seraphina reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first challenging gaze across the opera house to the sacred vows they had exchanged mere hours ago, she felt an absolute certainty about the path she had chosen. A path of partnership, love, and a future they would forge together, light years away from the shadows of the past. The weeks that followed were a time of discovery and adjustment. Their honeymoon journey through Italy provided an unparalleled opportunity to know each other away from the pressures and expectations of English society. In Florence, Venice, and Rome, they were simply Richard and Seraphina Blackwood, husband and wife, exploring ancient streets and Renaissance treasures together. They lingered in sun-drenched piazzas, admired masterpieces in hushed galleries, and shared quiet meals overlooking bustling markets. Away from watchful eyes and whispering tongues, their bond deepened, their laughter came more freely, and they fell more profoundly in love with each passing day. Each shared experience, each new sight, wove another thread into the rich tapestry of their burgeoning partnership. Richard, in particular, revealed unexpected facets of himself. Seraphina discovered his comprehensive knowledge of Italian art as he effortlessly guided her through galleries, sharing insights that brought ancient frescoes and sculptures to vivid life. He displayed a surprising talent for languages, conversing with ease in fluent Italian, often to her amused delight. A dry wit, rarely glimpsed in London society, emerged more frequently, sparkling in their private conversations and teasing exchanges. Seraphina, in turn, blossomed in the freedom of travel, her natural curiosity and quick intelligence making her a perfect companion for museum visits and cultural exploration, her observations often sparking new discussions and further revealing the depth of her own intellect. Their evenings were devoted entirely to each other, a precious time of unburdened intimacy. Their physical connection deepened alongside their emotional one, a natural progression of trust and affection. Richard proved to be a considerate and passionate lover, attentive to Seraphina's pleasure, and increasingly open about his own desires as their intimacy grew. There was a profound honesty in their shared moments, a complete acceptance that allowed for a communion of body and soul. Each touch, each whispered word, reinforced the extraordinary partnership they were building, a foundation of respect, understanding, and undeniable passion. In the quiet of their Roman hotel, with ancient city lights twinkling outside their window, they discovered new depths to their love. On their final night in Rome, as they dined on the terrace of their hotel overlooking the ancient city, bathed in the soft glow of Italian moonlight, Richard raised his wine glass in a toast. "To my Duchess," he said, his eyes holding hers across the table, "who has exceeded every expectation and fulfilled hopes I didn't know I had. You are everything I never realized I needed." Seraphina smiled, the Italian moonlight catching the sapphires at her throat, sparkling with a reflected inner light. "And to my Duke," she countered, her voice rich with emotion, "who promised me partnership and has delivered on that promise more fully than I dared dream." His eyes held hers, conveying emotions that ran deeper than words could express. "I love you, Seraphina," he confessed softly, "not merely as my wife or the future mother of my children, but as the remarkable woman you are, in every glorious, defiant facet." "And I love you," she replied simply, her gaze unwavering. "Not for your title or position, for those are merely adornments. I love you for the man I've come to know, Richard. Complex, demanding, sometimes difficult, yes, but always genuine, always worthy. The man who allows me to be myself, and who seeks truth even when it's uncomfortable." She reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent affirmation of their profound connection. Below them, the ancient city pulsed with life, a testament to enduring legacies, much like the one they were forging together. The love they had found transcended the grandeur of their surroundings, a quiet, powerful force. Their return to England in late October coincided with the first hints of autumn transforming Westcliff Abbey's sprawling gardens. The vibrant greens of summer had begun to yield to a rich tapestry of golds, russets, and deep reds. The renovations of the West Wing, ordered by Richard before their wedding, had been completed in their absence. The spaces were transformed with new furnishings, fresh wallpaper, and rearranged rooms that banished the explicit ghosts of the past without erasing them entirely. It was a space renewed, dignified, ready for a new chapter. The Abbey itself seemed to sigh with a sense of peace, no longer burdened by the heavy shadows that had once clung to its ancient stones. It was a home ready to embrace new life. Seraphina took to her role as Duchess with natural grace and quiet authority. She quickly won the loyalty and affection of the staff with her fair-minded approach and genuine interest in their well-being, a stark contrast to the distant previous Duchess. She established a lending library for the servants, much like her secret project in East London, bringing the joy of books to those who rarely had access. She championed improvements to the tenant cottages, personally overseeing details that ensured the comfort and health of the Abbey's laborers. She also began hosting intimate musical evenings and literary discussions, bringing a warmth and intellectual vibrancy to Westcliff that it had lacked for many years, drawing in local gentry and scholars alike. Richard watched his wife's transformation from Lady Seraphina Vance to the Duchess of Blackwood with a mixture of immense pride and occasional profound amazement. She had brought life back to spaces long shrouded in shadow, not just within the West Wing but throughout the entire estate. She had charmed even the most skeptical members of county society with her intelligence and grace, and through her patient correspondence and occasional visits, she had even begun to heal the rift with his aunt, Lady Isolde. Most importantly, she had become his true partner, challenging him when necessary, supporting him always, sharing both the burdens and joys of their elevated position with equal commitment and profound understanding. She was, quite simply, everything he hadn't known he needed. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after their wedding, a light snow fell over Westcliff Abbey, blanketing the grounds in pristine white as they sat together in the library before a roaring fire. Seraphina had been unusually quiet that evening, a contemplative expression on her face as she gazed into the flames, her hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. Richard, who had been reviewing estate ledgers, noticed her pensive mood. He set aside the heavy book, his brow furrowed with gentle concern, and moved to sit beside her on the settee, taking her hand in his. "You're pensive tonight," he observed softly, his thumb caressing her knuckles. "Is something troubling you, my love?" She looked up with a small smile, her eyes sparkling with a secret joy. "Not troubling?" "No, just significant." "Tell me," he encouraged, his gaze tender, sensing the shift in her demeanor. Seraphina took his hand, her smile widening slightly as she guided it to rest gently against her abdomen. His eyes widened, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. Joy, yes, but also a flash of fear, a glimmer of remembered pain, and then profound hope. "I believe we're to have a child, Richard," she announced softly, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "In early summer, according to my calculations." His hand trembled slightly where it rested against her stomach, his wide eyes searching hers, a silent question lurking in their depths. The weight of the past, the memory of Rosamond and their lost child, momentarily shadowed his joy, a fleeting but palpable presence. "You're certain?" he managed finally, his voice barely a whisper, a complex mixture of hope and apprehension. "Reasonably so," she replied, her eyes holding his steadily. "I've spoken with Dr. Bennet, who confirms my suspicions." Richard swallowed, struggling with speech. "Seraphina, I know you're thinking of Rosamond and your first child," she said gently, her hand covering his. "It's natural that you would. But I am not Rosamond," she reminded him firmly, her voice clear and strong. "My mind is sound, my body is strong, and I have a husband who sees me clearly and loves me fully." She touched his face, guiding his gaze to meet hers. "This child will be born into love, Richard, not the shadows of the past. We will face this new beginning together, with hope and strength." He drew her into his arms then, holding her with exquisite gentleness, as though she had suddenly become fragile. His grip was firm, yet tender, a lifeline in the storm of his past anxieties. "I will protect you both with everything I am," he vowed, his voice rough with emotion, his promise echoing the depth of his fear and his profound love. "I know," she said simply, her own voice thick with emotion, her trust absolute. "And I will bring this child safely into the world for both our sakes." As the snow fell softly outside, and the fire cast its warm glow across the library, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood held each other, no longer two wounded souls finding unexpected connection, but partners creating a future neither had dared imagine when their eyes first met across the Royal Opera House. In the safety of her husband's embrace, Seraphina thought of their extraordinary journey. From that first challenging gaze across the opera house to this moment of profound joy, their love had defied expectations, navigated societal currents, and healed wounds long thought beyond repair. The child growing within her represented more than the continuation of a ducal line. It was the physical manifestation of a love that had begun with a challenging glance and a single silent promise. The Duke had claimed her with his gaze, but in the end, she had claimed him in return. Together they had transformed claiming into belonging, possession into partnership, and the shadows of the past into the undeniable light of their shared future. Every step, every challenge, had been worth it for this profound certainty. Weeks after the wedding, back in a London drawing room, Lady Millicent Vance fanned herself dramatically, a satisfied smirk on her face. "The Ashworths," she reported to Eliza, "have quite quietly retreated from society. One hardly sees them about anymore." Eliza, ever observant, nodded. "Their rumors failed to gain any traction, Aunt." Richard's subtle counter-moves and Seraphina's dignified response at every turn quite disarmed them. Millicent hummed in agreement. Indeed, their unified appearance at every event, the way he looks at her, well, it quite deterred any further gossip. Who could doubt such a love match? The rival family's retreat was a quiet victory, a testament to the strength of Alaric and Seraphina's united front, clearing the way for their future. The winter of 1885 faded into a hopeful spring in 1886, marked by the gentle progression of Lady Seraphina's pregnancy. Westcliff Abbey, once shrouded in the echoes of a painful past, now brimmed with a quiet anticipation. Seraphina moved through its halls with a newfound grace, her growing belly a visible testament to their shared future. Richard, ever the attentive husband, was exceptionally so. His gaze followed her, a constant, unspoken question in his steel blue eyes. "Are you comfortable, my love?" he would ask, his hand often finding a resting place on her abdomen, a gesture of both tenderness and quiet anxiety. Mrs. Gable, ever observant, noted his subtle tension. "His Grace frets," she'd murmured to Seraphina one afternoon as Richard oversaw the placement of a new, softer cushion on a drawing-room settee. Seraphina merely smiled, reaching for Richard's hand. "He wishes for everything to be perfect," she'd reply, her own strength a silent reassurance against his unspoken fears. "And it will be, Richard, it will be." The approach of summer brought with it the onset of Seraphina's labor, a long and arduous process that tested the limits of her endurance. Duke Alaric Blackwood found himself pacing the birthing room anteroom in Westcliff Abbey, the very air thick with a tension that mirrored the storm within him. Every soft moan, every sharp cry from behind the closed door was a fresh torment, an echo of a past he had desperately tried to outrun. His haggard face, usually composed, was etched with a profound helplessness, haunted by the specter of Rosamund's tragedy. "Silas?" he rasped, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It is happening again, isn't it? The waiting, the helplessness." Mr. Silas Croft, ever the steady anchor, placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "No, Richard, it is not happening again. Seraphina is strong. And she is not Rosamund." Richard only clenched his jaw, the image of his first wife's final, desperate act flashing before his eyes. He had failed once. The thought that he might fail again, that Seraphina, his Seraphina, might suffer a similar fate, was a torment worse than any physical pain. The hours stretched, each one an eternity, until finally, piercing the heavy silence, came the faint, exquisite sound of a baby's cry. A wave of profound relief washed over Alaric, so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. The cry, faint yet clear, cut through the oppressive fear that had gripped him for hours. Moments later, the door opened, and the midwife, beaming, beckoned him inside. He moved as if in a dream, his anxiety replaced by an overwhelming, joyous surge. There, in the soft glow of the birthing room, lay Seraphina, weary but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a quiet pride, a triumph that spoke volumes of the difficult journey she had just undertaken. "Richard," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "meet your son." He knelt beside the bed, gazing at the small, perfect face nestled against her. A healthy boy. Their son. The profound joy that filled him was unlike anything he had ever known. A pure, unblemished happiness that banished the lingering shadows of his past. He reached out a trembling hand, reverently touching the baby's soft cheek. This was not a repeat of history, but a glorious new beginning. 8 weeks later, June 1886 brought gentle summer breezes to Westcliff Abbey, stirring the curtains in the newly decorated nursery. Lady Seraphina Vance sat in a plush rocking chair, a picture of serene motherhood, her infant son cradled in her arms. James Oliver Blackwood, future Duke of Westcliff, was a tiny marvel, with his father's dark, fine hair and his mother's strikingly inquisitive gaze. Richard stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel, watching his wife and son with an undisguised adoration that softened the sharp lines of his face. He crossed the room, moving with a quiet reverence, and knelt beside the rocking chair. Reaching out, he touched his son's tiny hand, marveling as the perfect fingers curled reflexively around his own, a miniature grip that already felt impossibly strong. "He's refusing to sleep again," Seraphina said, looking up at Richard with a soft smile. "I believe he's afraid he might miss something important." Richard chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that filled the peaceful nursery. "Like father, like son, I suppose," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the infant, stubborn and curious, a dangerous combination he clearly inherited from his mother. Seraphina laughed softly, a melodic sound that brightened the room. "And I seem to recall a certain duke who refused to take no for an answer during our courtship. The stubbornness, my dear Richard, is definitely a joint contribution." He leaned down, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, then on the crown of James's head. Their shared smile, warm and full of affection, spoke of a bond that had grown unbreakable. Richard pulled back slightly, his expression softening with a lingering tenderness. "How are you feeling today, Seraphina?" he asked, his voice laced with the quiet concern that still clung to him after her difficult delivery. "Stronger," she assured him, her hand covering his. "Dr. Bennett says I'm recovering remarkably well." His memory of the long hours of labor, her exhaustion, and his own torturous helplessness outside the birthing room still haunted him like a persistent phantom. But unlike Charlotte, Seraphina had emerged triumphant, presenting him with their son with weary pride, a testament to her unwavering strength despite the ordeal she had endured. Her resilience, her very being, was a constant reassurance, a quiet, powerful declaration that this time their future was truly different. A soft knock at the nursery door announced the arrival of Mr. Silas Croft, who entered, a warm smile gracing his usually reserved features as he took in the domestic scene. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, Lady Seraphina," he said. "Lady Isolde has arrived from London." Richard nodded, his expression calm. "Thank you, Silas. Please tell her we'll join her in the drawing-room shortly." The rapprochement between Richard and his estranged aunt had progressed steadily over the months since the wedding, a testament to Seraphina's gentle persistence and Isolde's own quiet shift. "She's brought gifts for James again, I expect," Seraphina said, a hint of amusement in her voice as Silas departed. "He'll be the most pampered child in England at this rate." Richard reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "He's the only grandnephew of a woman who never had children of her own, Seraphina," he pointed out, a rare, soft note in his voice. "And the first Blackwood of a new generation. Of course, she dotes on him." Their conversation reflected the subtle, yet steady, healing of the family rift, a quiet victory in itself, fostered by the new life that had entered Westcliff Abbey. Seraphina gazed down at their son, who had finally begun to drift towards sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "It still amazes me sometimes," she said softly, her voice imbued with wonder. "How much has changed in a year? How much healing has occurred?" Richard nodded, his gaze meeting hers, understanding her meaning completely. From that first challenging night at the opera to this tranquil moment, holding their son, their journey had been one he could never have anticipated. A journey of profound transformation, of shadows giving way to light, all because of her. "No regrets?" Seraphina asked, her question light, yet carrying a profound weight. Richard's gaze held hers, unwavering and sincere. "None," he replied without hesitation. "Every step, every challenge, every moment of doubt, they all brought us here." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the peaceful nursery, their sleeping son, their joined hands. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. To everything I never knew I needed until you defied me with a single glance from across the opera house. It was an absolute statement, a final, definitive closure to the painful chapters of his past, replaced by the profound satisfaction of his present. Seraphina leaned forward, her heart overflowing, to kiss him softly, and claimed you with a single gaze from afar, she added, completing the narrative circle of their extraordinary story. They sat together in perfect contentment, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the nursery windows, illuminating their sleeping son peacefully between them. The journey that had begun with a challenging glance and a quiet defiance had culminated in a profound, harmonious belonging, a testament to the power of a love that defied convention and healed the deepest wounds. As sleep began to claim her in the peaceful quiet of the nursery, Seraphina reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first defiant meeting, to the sacred vows they had exchanged mere hours ago, to the miracle cradled in her arms. They had transformed claiming into belonging, possession into partnership. The child growing within her represented more than the continuation of a ducal line. It was the physical manifestation of a love that had transcended society's expectations and healed wounds long thought beyond repair. The shadows of the past had truly turned into the light of their shared future. In the safety of her husband's embrace, Eve thought of their extraordinary journey. From that first challenging gaze across the opera house to this moment of profound joy, the Duke had claimed her with a gaze, but she had claimed him in return. Together they had transformed claiming into belonging, possession into partnership, and the shadows of the past into the light of their shared future. They were living proof that even the deepest shadows can give way to light when hearts are brave enough to seek it, creating a lasting legacy of love and partnership that would echo through generations at Westcliff Abbey. Epilogue. A quiet afternoon. 2 years later, Westcliff Abbey hummed with a different kind of quiet, one filled with peace and contentment. In the magnificent library, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Lady Seraphina, now Duchess of Westcliff, sat by the grand fireplace, engrossed in a rare volume, while their son, James Oliver, a boisterous toddler of 2, played quietly with a set of wooden blocks nearby. Richard entered, pausing in the doorway to observe the scene, a soft smile gracing his lips. "Lost in another world, my love," he murmured, moving to kiss the top of her head. Seraphina looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Only to find you here, bringing me back to this one." He settled beside her, pulling James onto his lap. "The best of all worlds, wouldn't you agree, little Duke?" James gurgled, reaching for his father's spectacles, a picture of domestic bliss that spoke of a partnership truly forged in love. Seraphina's progressive work, once a closely guarded secret, now flourished under the open patronage of the Duke and Duchess of Westcliff. In East London, the Women's Literary Circle and Lending Library bustled with activity. Seraphina, no longer needing to disguise herself, moved among the women, engaging in vibrant discussions about the books and their impact. Eleanor Croft, Silas's sister, now managed the thriving institution with pride. "Your Grace," Eleanor said, meeting Seraphina's gaze with genuine warmth. "His Grace's recent donation for the expansion has been invaluable, and his public support it has silenced so many of the detractors." Seraphina smiled, watching a young woman, her face alight with understanding, close a book of poetry. This was her vision realized, a testament to the power of knowledge and the strength of a partnership that embraced, rather than stifled, her progressive ideals. Even Lady Seraphina Blackwood, once a figure of bitter accusation, had found a measure of peace. During a social call at Thornbury House, her demeanor was noticeably softened, the hard edge in her eyes replaced by a quiet contemplation. She watched Seraphina move through the drawing room with an easy confidence, greeting guests, her laughter light and genuine. Later, over tea, Isolde turned to Seraphina. "You wear the title well, Lady Seraphina," she said, her voice devoid of its former coolness. "And you have brought a happiness to Richard I, truly believed impossible." Seraphina met her gaze, sensing a genuine, if still guarded, respect. He has brought me great happiness in return, Lady Isolde. Isolde nodded slowly, a faint, melancholic smile touching her lips. I see that. For that, I am grateful. Charlotte, she would have wanted him to find such contentment, despite everything. It was not a full embrace of their relationship, but a quiet, hard-won acceptance, a testament to Seraphina's grace and the passage of time. The west wing of Westcliff Abbey, once a mausoleum of grief, was now fully transformed. Seraphina and Richard walked through the elegantly redecorated rooms, now a vibrant extension of their family apartments. The pale lavender and soft cream hues, the carefully chosen furnishings, spoke of comfort and new life. Yet subtle elements remained: a delicate silver locket, a small framed watercolor of a flower Rosamond had loved, artfully placed in a private sitting room. They acknowledged her memory without being haunted by it. It is beautiful, Richard, Seraphina said, her hand resting on his arm. A memory, not a shadow. He squeezed her hand. Our past, acknowledged. Our future, built on light. The space, once a symbol of his greatest failure, was now a testament to their enduring strength, a reminder that even tragedy could be integrated into a new, hopeful narrative. That evening, as firelight danced across the library at Westcliff Abbey, Richard and Seraphina sat together on a plush settee, their hands entwined. James was long asleep in the nursery, and the vast house was quiet save for the crackle of the flames. They had overcome societal expectations, confronted painful pasts, navigated malicious whispers, and built a life that was profoundly their own. Their love, born from an unconventional gaze and forged in truth and understanding, was a testament to the power of genuine partnership. They were a beacon, proving that even in a world bound by rigid conventions, true love could not only endure, but flourish, healing old wounds and creating a lasting legacy of light. Dear friends, we've reached the end of another story. We hope you've enjoyed every moment, whether while doing your chores or simply enjoying the audio, accompanied by a cup of warm milk or tea. We love being your daily company, your moment of relaxation, happiness, and pleasure. As always, we make it a point to gift you with timeless stories of love, companionship, and joyful moments. We love your comments. We love your presence here. Each story we share is carefully chosen with you in mind, our faithful listeners, who give us the privilege of entering your homes and hearts day after day. We love your comments. We love your presence here. Each story we share is carefully chosen with you in mind, our faithful listeners, who give us the privilege of entering your homes and hearts day after day. We love your comments. We love your presence here. Each story we share is carefully chosen with you in mind, our faithful listeners, who give us the privilege of entering your homes and hearts day after day until our next adventure, where new characters and emotions await us. Always remember, the best stories are those that resonate in our souls and make us believe in the power of true love. Until our next adventure, where new characters and emotions await us, always remember, the best stories are those that resonate in our souls and make us believe in the power of true love. With affection, your favorite storytelling company, The Legends or The Fall Team. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope this story touched your heart, stirred your imagination, and brought a bit of magic to your day. Always remember, the best stories are those that resonate in our souls and make us believe in the power of true love. With affection, your favorite storytelling company, The Legends or The Fall Team. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope this story touched your heart, stirred your imagination, and brought a bit of magic to your day. Every like, comment, and subscription supports our work deeply from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope this story touched your heart, stirred your imagination, and brought a bit of magic to your day. Every like, comment, and subscription supports our work deeply from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for being here. Please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, and sharing this video with someone who loves a good story. Every like, comment, and subscription supports our work deeply from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for being here. Please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, and sharing this video with someone who loves a good story. Your support helps us stay motivated to continue bringing you powerful tales of love, redemption, and unexpected twists. And remember, at the end of this video, another suggested story will appear on your screen. Your support helps us stay motivated to continue bringing you powerful tales of love, redemption, and unexpected twists. And remember, at the end of this video, another suggested story will appear on your screen. Click it and discover even more emotional, breathtaking adventures. You just might find your next favorite story with affection. The Legends or the Fall Team.